Thank you so much, Julie, for that lovely introduction and for setting this up and for making this class happen. I've truly enjoyed this. For those of you that have been to all of the classes, thank you. For those of you that were two of the classes, or for those of you that are here for the very first time or saw it on YouTube, thank you for being here. It truly brings me joy to get to share our traditions with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and spotlight myself here. I would recommend making your screen as large as possible so you can see the text clearly on here. So today, as Julie mentioned, is the third installment of our Mahzor 101, Mahzor 101, an introduction to the prayer book. Those of you that would like to see the first two classes, they are posted on YouTube. Julie can put that link in the chat so you can watch those afterwards and catch up on what you missed. So today, the first class, for those of you that weren't here, was all about Erev holiday. So the evening before the day. So Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, Kol Nidre. Our second class last week was all about the daytime service, our morning shacharit, the sort of the meaty part of the day on both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Oh, and there are some Shreveport people here. Hello, Shreveport. Shout out to those of you in the community in the room. So today we're going to finish out the days. Today we're going to talk about the concluding services of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. What are they? How do they go? Does your community do them? Are they even in the Mahzor? We're going to see that one of them is actually mysteriously missing in a few Maksorim. So we'll talk about all of that today. I see someone uses Kol Neshama, a reconstructionist, Sidur, Mahzor, and I actually do have page numbers for that one now. So on that note, let's dive in, because what we're going to do today is first review and go over sort of the various Maksorim that I've created source sheets for here. We're going to look at an outline of the whole holiday. Now that we've sort of done these three classes, we're going to take a step back and look big picture what's going on with the order of these holidays. Then we'll take a look at the afternoon service. So what happens on a regular or Shabbat afternoon versus the holidays. And then finally end up with our conclusion for Yom Kippur, a special Ne'ilah service, which we'll go over. And then we'll definitely end some time today with some Q&A. So you can definitely type your questions in the chat as we go, assuming that they're on topic with what we're talking about. Go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can go ahead and save them for the very end, entirely up to you. All righty, so here we go. These are the Maksorim, the high holiday prayer books. In class 1, we talked a little bit more in depth as to the history of that word Mahzor and these books and where this all comes from. So you can check out the YouTube from class 1 for a little bit more of that information. But if any of these books on screen look familiar to you, or you've got one nearby, go ahead and grab it. Have it nearby, have it handy. If none of these look familiar to you because you either don't own a Mahzor, you've never been to high holiday services, or any other millions of reasons that none of these might look familiar, don't worry, you don't need one in hand to know what's going on here, to be able to follow along. And perhaps this class can be a guide to buying your first Mahzor if you don't have one yet. And if you'd like recommendations for your specific movement or your specific community, you're welcome to email me after the class, and I'm happy to help where I can. So these are the Maksorim. We've got a Mishkan HaNefesh. I spelled that one correctly today. With a CCAR press, that's a reform, a Mahzor in 2 sets, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Koren Sidur, the Koren Mahzor, is an Orthodox Mahzor. The version that I have on the source sheet is the all Hebrew version, but they do have a Hebrew English version as well. Lev Shalem is the newest of the conservative movements, Mahzorim. And then we've got some older from these movements as well. The Art Scroll is Orthodox. Kol Neshama is the Reconstructionist movements. Very, very large Mahzor. It's definitely the thickest of all of the Mahzorim. Gates of Repentance is the older Reform one. Mahzor Chadash is technically non-denominational, but it was written by some conservative rabbis. Union Prayer Book was the very first of the big Reform movement, Mahzorim. The old Harlow, put out by the conservative movement, and the Silverman, put out by the conservative movement. So any of these that you have, all of the page numbers are going to be on our source sheet. The source sheet looks like this. It's a whole bunch of page numbers here that you'll see. And at the top are all of the various Mahzorim that we just talked about. And we'll look at that in just a moment as well. So let's talk about, first and foremost, big picture. What is a day of prayer in the life of a Jew? Generally speaking, Judaism and the rabbis mandate 3 prayers services a day. And what we mean when we say 3 services a day is we're really talking about the Amidah, the standing section, this big section of 7 to 19 prayers, depending on when in the year we are. There are 3 times a day when an observant individual who's going to pray as often as they can is going to do that in the Jewish tradition. There's going to be a morning Amidah, an afternoon Amidah, and an evening Amidah, i.e. a morning service, an afternoon service, and then an evening service. Now, these correspond to various things our tradition tells us might correspond to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and when they prayed. It more likely corresponds to the sacrificial times during temple times when people would bring sacrifices to the temple. But then there are additional services that are added into the day. Now, again, I want to reiterate, when we say service, we're talking about a dedicated grouping of time and prayers that are put together. You can absolutely say more than 3 prayers in a given day. In fact, the rabbis in the Talmud say that you should try to say 100 blessings in a single day. And that's actually not as many as you think. If you think about, right, you say a blessing when you eat food, and you say a blessing when you go to the bathroom, and you say a blessing when you see a rainbow or a scholar in the room. There's blessings for everything. But when we're talking about a daily sort of regiment of prayer, we're talking about morning, afternoon, and evening. Of course, some synagogues will do those together in community. Others will not, and will have their community members who wish to do that individually on their own. That changes how things go a little bit. But generally speaking, we've got morning, afternoon, and evening. Now, on Shabbat and holidays, in the mornings, we add what is called musaf. And the word musaf literally means additional, because rabbis are not good at naming things. All right, let's just get that out on the table. They're like, it's an extra one. What should we call it? How about extra? Great idea. And that's what they named it. So we have our musaf service on Shabbat in the mornings only. And then we have Torah reading that takes place in the mornings on Mondays, Thursdays, Shabbat, or holidays. Now, what exactly we're reading out of the Torah is going to change depending on what we're doing and what day it is in the year. In the mincha service, the afternoon service, this is actually our shortest service of all of them. Mincha during the weekday on your own can take 10 minutes or less. I mean, it's super, super, super short service. On Shabbat and some holidays, not all holidays, but some holidays, as we're going to see in a moment, we also add a Torah reading, a shorter Torah reading, into the afternoon prayers. And then our evening service is usually pretty straightforward, except on Yom Kippur, which we're going to see in just a moment here, where we add something a little extra. So what we're going to talk about today is this mincha service, this afternoon portion for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So what does a normal afternoon service look like? Well, in true fashion of the previous 2 classes that I've taught, I have these lovely little charts for us. A regular afternoon service on a regular weekday or a Shabbat would start with Ashrae, some warm-up psalms. Then we have our Torah reading. It's going in and out of fuzziness. Oh, all right, so let's just switch this gear a little bit here. And then we'll just take a little extra second if I need to show the page numbers. Let's see what happens here. Hopefully that's a little better. Just got to open up my chat box now so I can see everybody still. Okay. Here we are. Okay. On Shabbat and holidays, we would have our Torah reading. If it's a weekday, we would skip straight from the Ashrae into the Amidah. Then we have our Amidah for whatever the day is, followed by our conclusion. Very straightforward forward service, very, very short on a regular day. That being said, we change it up a little bit on Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah afternoon service looks exactly the same as a regular one, minus there's no Torah reading on Rosh Hashanah unless it's Shabbat. Because Shabbat always has a Torah reading in the afternoon, we would have a Torah reading in the afternoon. So as a result of that, many of the Mahzorim that we're going to see, let's see if I do this, is it sharing still? No, it's not sharing. Okay, let me see if I can get the share to do that desktop instead of the app. 1 second, let's try this. Now if I go over, is this sharing now? Can we see the page numbers on my screen?
Yes.
Oh, all right, good, we got it to work. So you'll notice here that a lot of the Maksorim actually just won't include the Torah service in there at all, either because they don't expect the community to do a Torah service, even if it's Shabbat, or they decided that, you know what, we're just going to focus on the Rosh Hashanah stuff. And if there's Shabbat, then they'll deal with Shabbat in their own way. So this year, because it does not fall on Saturday, there's no Torah reading during Rosh Hashanah afternoon. So we've got a really short afternoon service for Rosh Hashanah, Ashrae, Amidah, and some regular concluding prayers. Now, many congregations choose, because it's so short, simply not to do an afternoon service on Rosh Hashanah altogether. Many congregations simply don't call you back. They say, you know what, go home, take a nap, do whatever you're going to do in the afternoon of Rosh Hashanah, call it a day. If we look at the Mahzorim, the old Reform movement ones, the Gates of Repentance and the Union Prayer Book, they actually don't even have the service in there at all. There's no afternoon service for Rosh Hashanah, even anywhere in the Mahzor. So that's not uncommon for a community to say, you know what, it's so short, people don't want to come all the way back to shul for such a short service, let them stay home. That won't be the same on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, we add a bit, as we're going to see in a second. So if you're wondering, I've been to Rosh Hashanah for so many years and I've never noticed the afternoon, what's going on? That's why. That's what's going on. Thank you. Someone wrote in the chat, instead they might do Tashlich. Tashlich is not something that I was going to cover because it's not usually in the Mahzor itself, but Tashlich is a lovely ritual where we sort of symbolically throw away our sins into the water. People do it at the river, at the ocean, at a stream, depends on where you live, I suppose, and what kind of access you have to water. If you're going to do it in a place where there's birds, I have to give the environmental spiel here for a moment. Don't use bread, use bird seed. Bread is not good for birds. Use bird seed. Anywho, that's Tashlich, that's a separate thing. So very often they will do that on Rosh Hashanah in the afternoon instead of calling everyone back, or in conjunction with our mincha, our afternoon service. Now, Yom Kippur is a bit different. Yom Kippur, the afternoon shifts dramatically because we have a special conclusion. So when we get to Yom Kippur afternoon, we actually, in the Mahzor, you're going to see, have gotten rid of the warm-up psalms. They've gotten rid of the Ashrae. Now, what they've done is they haven't actually gotten rid of it. They've moved it into the Ne'ilah service, into the concluding service, as we'll see a little bit later. But instead of having a regular conclusion, and what I mean by regular conclusion is Kaddish Shalem, Elenu, Mortar's Kaddish, those kinds of prayers. Instead, we go straight into the Torah reading, just dive right in, regardless of whether or not it's Shabbat. There is a Torah reading on Yom Kippur afternoon, even if it's not Shabbat, followed by an Amidah, and then followed straight into Ne'ilah, which is our conclusion, but oddly enough, is actually an extra Amidah. So Yom Kippur, if we actually go back here and look at our daily service, normally during the week, we would have 1, 2, 3 Amidahs. On Shabbat and holidays, we might get a 4th with Musaf. Only on Yom Kippur do we actually get a 5th Amidah, and that's in Ne'ilah. So you can imagine just how much prayer, if you really are following the whole Mahzor and staying in services the entire day, you really could spend all day in service. There are 5 services over the course of Yom Kippur. It's a long day, especially since it's also a fast day. And if there's anybody out there who's never done a Yom Kippur service, who's going to do it for the first time and is going to fast, I'm warning you right now, it's a long day. So come into it with the right mindset, expecting that long day. And I also want to say that for those of you that have fasted your entire lives, but for whatever reason, because this year is an extra hot year, or you're a little bit older this year, or you've recently been in the hospital, or you're pregnant, or for any other reason, a fast is going to be physically too hard for you, do not fast. Your health comes first. In fact, the rabbis of the Talmud mandate that if a doctor tells you it is not safe for you to fast, you are not permitted to fast according to the most orthodox of orthodox rabbis. So, like, take care of your health on Yom Kippur, please, 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 please. Somebody wrote in the chat that some of the that in the art scroll siddur in the Orthodox Mahzor, that Tashlich actually is in the Mahzor. That very well might be the case. It wasn't in enough of them that I added it into our page numbers. So I left that off of our sheet. But yes, Tashlich is a lovely service, kind of separate from all of the other pieces here. Do we chant Haftarah during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Really great question. On Rosh Hashanah, remember, there is no Torah service unless it's Shabbat. And on a standard Shabbat afternoon, there is no Haftarah. So on Rosh Hashanah, there would not be any Haftarah. But on Yom Kippur, there is. On Yom Kippur, we actually do read from the Haftarah on Yom Kippur afternoon. And we typically read from the book of Jonah. Some congregations and some Maksorim will actually have the entire book of Jonah inside. It's a very, very long Haftarah. Others will do sections from Haftarah Yonah, from the book of Jonah. What about a Yizkor service? We actually talked about Yizkor in our last class. That's typically done in the mornings, not in the afternoons. So check out our second video to learn about Yizkor, Avodah, martyrology. That was all addressed in last week's class. All right, so what is in our service? What is our warm-up psalms? Great. So somebody wrote, many congregations have moved Yizkor to the afternoon. This is actually a great opportunity for me to just share that there are so many traditions that are community specific that are absolutely lovely and amazing. And to know why your community does specific things that you do, you got to talk to your rabbis or those later in the year, or sorry, those that have been in the community for years and years and years, and sort of figure out where these customs come from. What we're going to talk about mostly today is what is standard for tradition, what is standard in the Maksorim, how we're going to navigate these books the way they are, and why these books are the way they are. So if I say something is happening traditionally, or the Mahzor has it in a specific place, and you're thinking to yourself, whoa, my community does not do it like that. Either A, save the question for the end, and I'd love to talk about it and hear your community's tradition, and we can discuss it. Or B, ask your local rabbi or local service leader why it is that they do it the way they do it, because I'm sure they have really great reasons, and I wouldn't be able to know what those are just being here in Shreveport, Louisiana. But I'd love to learn about them, so don't be shy about saying our community does something different. Please, please, please. All right, so afternoon service. We start with Ashrae. Ashrae is a lovely acrostic poem. It goes the order of the Aleph Bet, Gimel Dalet Hey, all the way down. The word Ashrae means happy, right? Ashrei yoshvei veitecha. Happy are those that dwell in your presence, Adonai. And it's a really wonderful way to just sort of open up our day and set ourselves in a good headspace. The rabbis in the Gemara actually say that those who say the Ashrae 3 times a day have a place in the world to come. They love the Ashrae. Like, what a wonderful thing to focus on is this notion of joy and happiness being in God's presence. And then we move into a little bit more of a contested section of prayer called Kedusha de Sidra, or Uva L'Tzion, are the beginning words here. And if I look over in our source sheet here, you'll notice that the Reform movements have actually completely removed that section from their Mahzorim. And they removed that from most of their Sidurim as well. And the reason is that this section is all about redemption and sort of a return to Zion, a return to Israel. And back in the early days of the Reform movement was the sort of growth of the Zionistic movements and the desire for Israel. And there was sort of this mentality amongst the more modern communities that we don't need God to redeem us and bring us back to Jerusalem. We're going to do it ourselves. Nowadays, with the existence of Israel, that has started to kind of come back into popular sort of prayer services, even in more modern communities. So your Mahzor may or may not have this section. Your community may or may not do this section for cultural reasons about sort of what they think about Israel and whose role it is for us to bring peace to the land of Israel. But that's where that kind of gets a little contested here. And of course, this whole section, as I mentioned before, is going to be completely omitted on Yom Kippur because we're going to add it into our Ne'ilah service later. So then, of course, that dives us into the Torah reading. There is no Torah reading on Rosh Hashanah unless it happens to fall in Shabbat. There are only 3 aliyot during the afternoon services. Now, that's the biggest difference between a morning Torah service and an afternoon service. In the morning, we have 7 Torah readings, 7 aliyot. We break it into 7 sections. In the afternoon, we have 3. It's a bit more of a teaser. It's like it's a shorter service. You're getting ready for the thing that's coming next. So we have no Haftarah on Shabbat or Rosh Hashanah, but we do have 3 aliyot plus the Haftarah, as I mentioned, the book of Jonah on Yom Kippur here, and that's going to be sort of standard. Now, I wrote that the Haftarah is usually Jonah, and I didn't really write what the Torah is here, and there's a reason for that. Because depending on which Mahzor you pick up, it's going to have something different in it. And far be it from me to tell you and your community what you should read out of the Torah on Yom Kippur. So whichever Mahzor you use or whatever tradition your rabbi gives, that's what you'll read. Typically, though, it's somewhere in the middle of Leviticus, the end of Genesis, talking about the themes of God's holiness, the themes of redemption, the covenant between God and the people Israel. These are the kinds of themes that are typically found in the Torah reading. But as I mentioned, far be it from me to tell you exactly what's going to be in your Mahzor. But I have listed here in our, let's go to Yom Kippur here. Where are we? Concluding Yom Kippur here. In the Torah readings, I do have what page numbers you can find those Torah readings on in that source sheet. So you can turn there for Yom Kippur and see what exactly is your community reading. Which brings us, of course, into our Amidah. Now, again, we spent a lot more time talking about the Amidah in depth in those first 2 classes. So this is going to be a bit of an overview here, just as a little review. Purposefully so we have time for questions at the end. So if I'm going a little quickly today, a little more broad, it's because I really want to give an opportunity for questions at the end. But normally in a weekday, we would have 19 blessings. On Shabbat and holidays, that gets reduced to 7. The middle section, what's listed here as number 4, is the sanctity of the day. That is what replaces all of the requests in a regular weekday for God to do stuff. On Shabbat and holidays, God's resting. We're resting. We don't ask God to do a lot of things. So in the weekday, we ask God to do a lot of things. On Shabbat and holidays, we get rid of that section and we insert this section number 4, Kedushat Hayom, and just acknowledge the day we're in. On Rosh Hashanah, we acknowledge Rosh Hashanah. On Yom Kippur, we acknowledge Yom Kippur. And on every other holiday, we acknowledge those particular days. So we have the Avot, the Imahot, talking about our ancestors, the Gevurot, God's powers, Kedushat Hashem, the sanctity of God, Kedushat Hayom, the sanctity of the day we're in, Avodah, the priestly obligations and what we did in the temple, Hoda'ah, gratefulness to God, and then, of course, shalom, and we end with a prayer for peace for the world. Now, also on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in every service and throughout the Maksorim, are also piyutim scattered throughout. So there are, as we mentioned in the first class, the piyutim are non-biblical, non-scriptural songs and poems and things that have been created over the years. Some of them grew really, really big in popularity over time and made their way into the Mahzorim. Some communities like some, others like others. If your Mahzor has extra things inside of it, extra piyutim, moments that don't say Baruch Atah Adonai, but are like big songs or things that we do, or there's extra pages that you've never done in your community, that's what those are. Those are the editor's choice, saying, here are the things from history that I really like and want to put in the Mahzor. Some communities do them, some communities don't. There's no sort of standard place in these particular services, in the afternoon services, where you would stick piyutim. So some Mahzorim have them in different places. Of course, that's a little different from than on Yom Kippur, which we'll see in just a second here. The one place where there are piyutim is that we do this section called slichot. And slichot on Yom Kippur, and if we look at our second page of the Yom Kippur packet here, we're on the page that says page 21 at the bottom, you'll notice we have Shema Kolenu, Ki Anu, Vidui, Al Chet. These are the prayers for forgiveness. These are our slichot prayers. Slichot literally means forgiveness. And thank you for the compliment to Jennifer for who thanked me for this particular source sheet. It was my pleasure to put this together. I hope we get some good use out of it. The art scroll is on all of them. You can see it over here on the right-hand side, art scroll and then Koren sack. So if you look at the headers, those are the names of the Sidurim, the various Sidurim that we're looking for. So slichot are prayers for forgiveness that we say on Yom Kippur, and typically those are added during the fourth prayer, during that blessing of sanctifying what day we're in. Of course, some Mahzorim have them in different places, right? That's not necessarily standard across the board, but traditionally that's where we would put it. We acknowledge this day is Yom Kippur. It's special. One of the things that's special about it is we're asking for forgiveness. And in our afternoon blessings, it's sort of that one last stab at saying to God, like, really, God, I meant it. Like, I'm really sorry. We did it in the morning. We did it in the evening before. And I'm going to do it again here and just really drive home this point of, God, please offer me some mercy and forgiveness. And then on Rosh Hashanah, we typically end with Avinu Malkeinu, possibly some other regular closing prayers, Kaddish Shalem, Elenu, in some Maksorim they have it, others don't. The reason why some Maksorim probably, and this is just my guess here, is because of traditions like Tashlich, or not being in the sanctuary altogether. And so the editors have sort of made their call of what they envision a day to look like. And they've included what they think communities are going to be popularly doing at that time. It's one of the reasons that as you look through the different Maksorim, depending on when it was published, you might see various changes that have happened over the years, even if it's from the same exact movement. Right? As the Reform movement developed, so did the Mahzor. As the conservative movement developed, so did the Mahzor. So some of the Mahzorim have Elenu and some of our additional ones. Why do we say Malkeinu and Avinu Malkeinu, since Malkeinu constricts Hashem to a king? Oh, what a lovely question. So there's a question in the chat here that of saying, well, hold on, why are we calling God Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King? Doesn't that limit God to this one construct of a kingly being? Really, really great question. And in fact, our rabbis teach us that God has 70 faces, right? There are 70 names for God, 70 faces of God. And we actually have both masculine and feminine gendered words to describe God. Words like Shekhinah, which is feminine, Malkeinu, king. We have words that describe God as a father figure or a mother figure or a parent figure or a ruling figure. We have all sorts of different ways that we refer to God. And typically the choice to use one versus another in any given prayer is going to be based on what we're trying to say to God, right? On Yom Kippur and on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're kind of seeing God as the judge figure here, right? God is looking back on all of our deeds throughout the year and with a heavy, hammer laying down the law, right? And we have this theology during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of God has the book of life open and is deciding whether or not to write in our name into the positive sides for the year to come. And so when we're addressing God, who's in that role of judge, the authors, and I want to be very clear here, the authors of the prayers, the authors of the Piyutim, not all of them were rabbis, but the authors of the Piyutim, like Avinu Malkeinu, chose to use that image of God as king to put us in the right headspace. I want you to imagine for a second, you're asking, for those of you that are parents, imagine how your child probably asks you for something versus how they ask their teacher for something versus how they ask their boss for something. Even though the request is still the same, who we're talking to and the lens we see them in changes. And so these brilliant, beautiful, poetic authors have created a whole slew of prayers and traditions, some that have stayed that people really love and we can find in the Mahzor, like Kol Nidre and Avinu Malkeinu, and others that didn't, that are lost to the annals of history that you can read scholarship books on and go, oh, that's a cool one. I wonder where they found that in some random cave in the middle of the Middle East. Any specific text to learn more about these 70 faces of God? Oh, Kabbalah is so not my forte. I'm so sorry. I don't have the source of that offhand, but I guarantee if you just Google 70 faces of God Judaism, you'll get like a Chabad website who's got something on it. It shouldn't be too hard to find where the original source is and to be able to study that. You could also go into Sefaria.org is also usually a great way. You can just type in 70 faces and you might get some actual source text for that. I do apologize. I set myself up for that one too. I knew as soon as I said it, I was like, ooh, I said something that's not my forte and someone's gonna want it. And oh, look, Julie coming to the rescue here. Great children's book about God's different names. I love that. I'm gonna have to save that link for later for myself. All right, so that's our Amidah. And for our Rosh Hashanah service, that's the end. Right, that's the end of our afternoon service. Go home, take a nap, do your tashlich, wait for Rosh Hashanah to end. That's it, we're done. However, we still have Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur is something special. And as we mentioned, that Ashrae that we got earlier is going to move over to where we are now in our service, the Ne'ilah service. And the Ne'ilah service, the word Ne'ilah literally means locking. And the idea here is that all throughout Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the gates of heaven, it's a weird word to use, but the gates of heaven have been open. God has the book of life open in front of God and is writing down names and is taking time and judging. And Ne'ilah is the moment where God is starting to lock up, right? The end of God's workday is here. It has arrived. God is closing the gates, closing the book, being done with this whole judgment thing for another year. And this is our last opportunity to sneak in some extra little prayers to God. One last little huzzah, one last little hurrah to say to God, God, if you didn't write down my name in the good stuff yet, I got one more shot here. I'm going to make my case one more time. So what we do is we take that Ashrae that we had earlier, the same exact Ashrae, the same exact Kedusha Desidra, the Uvalit Zion that we saw earlier in the Rosh Hashanah, and we stick it here in Ne'ilah, move to the exact same Amidah that we did earlier on Yom Kippur. Nothing's really different about it. There might be some words that are a little different here and there. There might be a piyut in your Mahzor in Ne'ilah that wasn't in the afternoon service. The editors may have said, well, we like this piyut for earlier and this piyut for later. So there might be some differences between one or the other. I don't want anyone to be like, I found on page 452 one letter difference, right? Like, Yes, there might be some differences. But generally speaking, it's the same Amidah. It's just one last opportunity, one last slichot. We have Petach Lanu, this piyut about God is open for us, God, one last time. Just crack the door just a little bit. Petach Lanu, open it for us. You've got some extra things here on our page number handout that you'll see there. But generally speaking, it's pretty much the same, followed by our regular closing for the most part with a little bit of difference. Now, in the Elah, there are a couple piyutim that I've added into our page numbers that were fairly universal that I noticed across the board here. One of them we'll notice, let me see if I can turn the page here, is this El Norah Alila. It's in the Reform, the Reconstructionist, and the Conservative Mahzorim. I couldn't find it in the Art Scroll or the Koran. That doesn't mean it's not there. It just means it wasn't where I was looking for it. So it might be in there somewhere, but I didn't see it. And oftentimes that's done between the silent Amidah and the out loud Amidah, though if you look at the page numbers, not all of them are going to follow that specific order here, depending on your Mahzor. But this particular piyut, which I know one of my rabbis, it's like his favorite ever. Shout out to Rabbi Adam Naftalin Kelman over at UC Berkeley. He absolutely loves this piyut. He whenever somebody else is help leading, he's like, no, I'm going to lead that one. He loves it. It's El Norah Alila. It means God of wondrous deeds. And it's this last moment of just really praising God. And look how wondrous God is, right? That same way that a child might say, Mom, you're the best, right before asking for a little extended curfew time, right? And then also asks for redemption. We have this last sort of plea for redemption. We get one last slichot, these prayers of forgiveness. God, really, I did mean it. I've said it 4 times already on Yom Kippur. I'm saying it again so you believe me that I meant every single word of it. One last slichot in here. And many also include, as I mentioned, this Petach Lanu, open for us the gates. One last final plea before God seals the book. Oh, thank you. I got a message here in the chat here. One difference that is in the Amidah, one difference that's changed is we have this word in many of the prayers that we talk about. God is writing in the book. God is kotvenu b'sefer chaim, right? Write us in the book of life. And in the Elah, we change that into chotmenu, seal us in the book of life. So the language changes a little bit here, right? We're going from God in the process of doing something to God, to saying to God, okay, God, I think I made it in. Now let's lock it up before you change your mind, right? Seal us in that book, and let's move on with our year. Okay, there's a great comment in the chat. Everyone should read it. I'm not going to dive into that. It's going to take us a little bit too into a tangent. The theology behind what does it mean to be sealed, and are you really sealed, and how can we actually, if we didn't get sealed in, change things later? Is there still time for tshuva? And all of that is a wonderful, lovely discussion. But if I dive deep into that, we're definitely not going to have time for questions. So definitely go ahead and talk about that in the chat. But we've got to move on here from the Elah, because we're going to have our concluding prayers, our Kaddish Aleim. Now, what we have for Yom Kippur is this is the only shofar blast of Yom Kippur, happens at the very, very end. So what we have here are 2 sections. We've got our Kaddish Aleim, and then we have what I put in the source sheet as Shema/Shofar. That's what I titled this little section here. And depending on which Mahzor you have, some of them put it all the way at the end after Mariv, after the weekday evening service, after everything's done. Others put it in right after the Kaddish Aleim, at the very end of Kaddish Aleim. Some of the Mahzorim put the shofar after the Kaddish Aleim and before the Shema, and some put it after the Kaddish Aleim and after the Shema. So there's a little bit of shifting around with this particular section in the different Maksorim. So you'll have to check your Mahzor for the order it puts it in, or your community for the order they do it in. But basically what we have here is one final Kaddish Shalem, one final Kaddish to praise God. And then we say that one line of the Shema, we say it one time. We say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. We say that Baruch Shem 3 times. And then we say the word Adonai Hu HaElohim. Adonai is God. Adonai Hu HaElohim 7 times, followed by a singular Tekiah Gedolah, the long blast of the shofar. As long as your shofar blower can blow is what it will be. And I said it last time, and it bears repeating. And I always have some great sympathy for our shofar blowers, because that was my very first Jewish job ever at age 13 as a trumpet player. I was asked by Congregation Adat Shalom in Los Angeles, shout out to Adat Shalom, to blow shofar for them. Your shofar blower will be better on Rosh Hashanah than they are on Yom Kippur. There, I said it, all right? They're fasting. It's hard. Cut them some slack on Yom Kippur. It won't be as long as it was on Rosh Hashanah, but they'll do the best they can. At the end of the fast, one big long Tekiah Gedolah, and then we will end with Ma'ariv. If your congregation sticks around for a little bit longer, they'll do a regular evening service, right? Because Ne'ilah is going to happen right as the sun is setting. And so then many communities will simply, while you're all still gathered there together, will do our Ma'ariv, but this will be a regular weekday evening service. The holiday is over at the moment of that shofar, the moment the sun goes down. So if your community does another Ma'ariv, another evening service, because remember, all of what we just talked about was the afternoon service. So now the sun goes down, stick around for a Ma'ariv. And of course, if it's Yom Kippur, a yummy, yummy, yummy breakfast meal. And that's going to conclude our Yom Kippur. Somebody wrote in the chat here that in some communities, I'm told Sephardic. I was not aware of that, but I love that. But that in some Sephardic customs that everybody who owns a shofar will come and do a Tekiah Gedolah all together. I think that would be awesome to see. I've never seen that done. I did have a rabbi once who liked to get a couple of shofar blowers. And when one shofar blower was sounding like they were running out of air, the next one would start and just kind of continue this shofar Tekiah Gedolah for a very, very, very long time. Lots of different traditions on the shofar. I love the shofar. Mine is actually over my right shoulder in the corner in that little bag. I don't know if you can see it or not. I love shofar. I think it's absolutely wonderful tradition we have. But that is our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur concluding services. So I'm gonna stop my screen share here for a second. We've got about 10 to 15 minutes, and I would love to simply open up the floor to questions. Maybe Julie can moderate a little bit, and you can either put them in the chat or I don't know how you want to do this, Julie. But feel free, your questions can be about anything I said today or in the previous 2 classes. Just found out women are allowed to blow the shofar. Yes, women, you can blow the shofar. I encourage it. Do it. It sounds great. And if your shul already has a shofar blower and they've been there for 50 years and they're not sharing the spotlight, get a shofar and do it at home. Every day of Elul. You can do it today. Let's do it. Shofar. Can I point out where the language changes to sealed? Yes, I absolutely can. I'm going to shift that here. Let me open up my page numbers while Julie fields some other questions here. Oh, nice. I'm seeing some people writing in the chats about various shofar practices. I love that. Let's see, where are we going to find this? Here we are. Maybe I'm not going to find it. Maybe I spoke too soon. I don't remember exactly where. Oh God. But it is in there, I promise. Am I at the wrong page? Maybe I'm the wrong service. No, I'm in the right service. All right, I'm not gonna find, let's see it. Okay, here we go. Thank you to Cantor Neil, who wrote to me. It's at Ne'ilah, the Avot, the Givurot, and the end of Shalom Rav. So let me just pull up one of those here. In my Siddur, in my Mahzor, it's going to be on 374 because I'm using the Mahzor Chadash. So here we are on 3-7. Oh no, that's Mincha. Sorry, Ne'ilah's here. I'm on the wrong page. That's why I couldn't find it. I was on the wrong page. On mine, it's going to be on page 408. And I'll hold it up to the screen.
You have that Maksorim page number reference guide to help out.
Yes, it will be in the Avot, the Givurot, and the end of the seventh blessing in our prayers here. We have. No, that's not the Avot. Oh, I was looking at the wrong. Oh man, I'm not even looking at nearly the right page. All right, 776. No wonder I couldn't find it. Here we go. Okay, so in the Avot, we can see here on my book, there's this section right in the middle that says Zochrenu lechaim. And so the way this typically goes is Zochrenu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'chot meinu b'sefer hachaim. There's that word right there. And all throughout Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we say, Zochrenu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'kot veinu b'sefer hachaim. So we get that change that happens right there in the middle of the section there. And thank you to Cantor Neil, who says it's also at the end of Modim, the end of the thanks blessing. So it's 4 times throughout the Amidah in the Ne'ilah, where that line, that word kot veinu changes to chot meinu. Really, really good question.
There was, I think, a little bit of confusion around the Haftarah on Rosh Hashanah. And just to reiterate that this class was about the afternoon service, that there are readings in the morning, Torah and Haftarah. This is from Gary. And also Gary asks about 1 versus 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, that his community is Reform and has 1 day of Rosh Hashanah instead of 2. And can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Oh, what a great question. Yeah, let me address that. And then there's a question in the chat here that I see. So we'll come to that one next in just a moment here. So yes, let me just repeat what Julie said, and thank you for that clarification, Julie. So we had 3 sessions of this Mahzor 101 class. The first class, which is now up on YouTube, was all about the evening of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? The very, very beginning. The second class, which is up on YouTube, was all about the morning, where we have a more extended Torah service with Haftarah on both days, a whole thing. You can see all about that in our YouTube video on the second class. And then today was the afternoon, which is the time in Rosh Hashanah where there is no Torah unless it falls on Shabbat. So all of that information is there in our videos. You just got to pick the one you need there. 1 versus 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. So this is actually a very, very tricky topic. Where the notion of 2 days of holiday comes from for all of the Chagim is all the way back to the Talmud. And I actually wrote a paper on this, so I could get you the citations, but it would take me too long to find that paper and pull it up exactly where those are. But it's in the Gemara, and if you email me, if you really want the specific sources, you can email me and I'll send you the exact sources in the Talmud of where they talk about 2 days of holiday. And where this comes from is that when the Jewish people had the Second Temple destroyed and they went off into the diaspora scattered across the world, all of a sudden they didn't know times. Right? We didn't have a set calendar with math the way that we have in today's world. We didn't know how to calculate when sundown was. And so there became this question, time zones were not so clear. So there became this question of, if you're living far away from Israel, do you celebrate the holiday when Israel is celebrating it, or when your calendar says you should be celebrating it. And when is that? Is it before? Is it after? Is it this day? Is it that day? There was a lot of confusion around the calendar. And what would happen is, and the Gemara talks a lot about this, is they, in Jerusalem, all throughout Israel, they would light these pyres whenever they saw a new moon, right? So you have Rosh Chodesh, you have your new moon, and they'd light this big flame, and then the next town over would light one, and the next town over would light one, and the next town over would light one. And then everyone would know that, okay, it's a new month. But the rabbis were concerned that, okay, maybe we wouldn't get the message in time, and maybe we'd accidentally celebrate the holiday on the wrong day. And so they instituted for Jews living not in Israel 2 days of Chagim. So that's 2 days of Sukkot, 2 days of Shavuot, 2 days of a whole bunch of things here, beginning, end, etc. In Israel, there's not 2 days of extra holidays. There's only 1 day. Because in Israel, they're like, we know what time it is. We know what day it is. We're in Israel. With the exception being Rosh Hashanah. Because the rabbis of the Gemara gave a different explanation for Rosh Hashanah as to the rest of the Chagim. And we don't have time to really dive into the nuances of these two pieces here. But in many communities of the diaspora today, not just the Reform communities, a lot of conservative communities as well, are no longer celebrating 2-day Chag. So 1 day, so 7 days of Sukkot instead of 8 days. Right? 1 day in the beginning, 1 day in the end, that's holiday. However, most of the communities that only celebrate 1 day of Chag are still celebrating 2 days of Rosh Hashanah because that particular day has a sort of difference to it. Now, another reason why a lot of communities like the notion of 2 days is that they put Yizkor on day 2 for a lot of these holidays, and then it encourages people to come to 2. If your community only does 8 days instead of 9 for Sukkot. Thank you. Misspoke. So Sukkot, Passover, Shavuot, these are the days that have the extra holidays. But if your community only does 1 day of holiday, talk to your rabbi what went into that decision. If your personal rabbi and customs are to do 1 day of Chag, talk to your teachers and your mentors of why you were taught one way or the other. Everyone will have real explanation and conversation around this. For many congregations, they figured we'll get more people if we just have 1 day and we'll just do 1 day of services inside. But even though they only do 1 day of services as a community, if you ask your rabbi might still be celebrating 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. So it really, it's a very heavily debated topic, especially in today's world where we do know the calendar a bit more. And there isn't such a question about when is the first of Tishrei and when isn't the first of Tishrei. But Rosh Hashanah, I do want to say, is in a sort of its own separate category from the rest of the Chagim that have 2 days. So it's a really, really great question. And you'll have to consult your local rabbi, because far be it from me to contradict your local rabbi. All right, there was a question. Sorry, Julie?
I was going to take something from the chat box, but.
Oh, yeah, please.
Someone asked when they should have the Rosh Hashanah meal or meals.
When to have Rosh Hashanah meals in terms of just like in general, when to eat on Rosh Hashanah?
Maybe.
Is that the question?
Let's see.
Where was that one?
Maybe it's connected to the 1 or 2 day of Rosh Hashanah, or maybe is it a tradition to eat in the evenings, in the daytime, or if the person wants to clarify their question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I have such an in-depth answer to it other than regular meal times. I typically, your day, I see Erica on screen also has a question. So Erica, I see your hand.
Oh, shit. Sorry, I'll have to, hold on.
Was that,
Sorry.
Erica, is on this very question? Is that?
This is Erica, ID number 356.
Oh, that's a different call that she's on. Okay. No worries.
Maybe, you know what, now that I'm reading the question more closely, and Neely, I think, clarified it, that it has to do with, someone was asking about the simanim, perhaps?
Okay, so
And
All right.
what that is?
Yeah, so let's just talk about in general when holidays occur in Judaism. In the Jewish tradition, we have our holidays from sundown to sundown. So when 3 stars are in the sky is when a holiday ends, and when the sun begins to go down is when a holiday, 3 stars is when the holiday ends. It begins when the sun starts to go down. So all holidays, Shabbat, every holiday, is roughly 25 hours long. So one extra bit, though, is that the rabbis also teach us that you can start a holiday early if you want to. So the moment we light candles to acknowledge a holiday has begun is when the holiday has begun. So there are those that will, in order to strictly celebrate their holiday meals on those holidays, will wait until after sundown to have their Erev Rosh Hashanah meal, so they can say, I'm eating this meal as part of Rosh Hashanah. Similarly, if you're going to have a third meal, right? So if you're going to do that dinner and then breakfast the next day, which in many traditional communities, you actually will pray before you do breakfast, so that prayer is the very first thing that you do in your day, that after that, you'll come home and you'll have a meal at that point. And then if you wanted to do another meal before the holiday ended, you would do it sort of before that sundown time to get in your traditionally 3 meals a day is what we have, evening, morning, afternoon. I don't know if that answered the specific question itself. Erica is back. She said she's got a question about the Rosh Hashanah Seder. Seder as in order, or Seder as in like Passover Seder?
Go ahead, Erica. You can unmute yourself. Oh, maybe she should go back to the call.
Okay, no worries. I don't know if I answered it or not. If I didn't, and you still have a question about something specific, feel free to email me. Here we go. I see. Okay, so Rosh Hashanah Seder, as in like we have a Passover Seder. This is not a custom I'm familiar with, a specific Seder for Rosh Hashanah. I'd love to hear more about that. You're welcome to shoot me an email and tell me a little bit more about what you do on that. It's just not a custom I'm familiar with, but I'm sure there are lots of customs I'm not familiar with. It's certainly not going to be one in the Mahzor. But if that's something you do, if you do a lot of food prep and have a lovely Rosh Hashanah Seder, I'm all for it. I mean, what Jewish holiday doesn't work with, it exists without food, other than Yom Kippur. But then we prepare for our break fast. I feel like there was another question here that I missed. There was a question about Ne'ilah, the congregation standing up for the ark to be open. Yeah, we didn't get a chance in these classes to go through sort of all the choreography of everything. There's a lot of ark opening and ark closing. There's a lot of standing that happens, especially on Yom Kippur. In some communities, you actually stand for all of Ne'ilah, which is very, very intense. Again, I want to stress your own personal health and safety. Stand if you're able to stand. Stay seated if you're not able to stand. It's that simple. If you're going to pass out, if you're going to fall, if you're going to have anything that threatens you in any way, shape, or form, please relax during services, especially at Ne'ilah, where you're at the end of a very long day and a very long fast, especially this year where we are seeing crazy heat across the country. Carolyn, did you want to share something about the Seder? You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure. So the Rosh Hashanah Seder is a Sephardic tradition, and it often features the simanim. So it's, in the order of a Rosh Hashanah Seder, Passover Seder, but in honoring the holiday of Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah with the simanim.
I love that. So if you couldn't tell by my physical appearance, I am not Sephardic. And I love when I learn about all of these other cultural traditions like the Sephardim have and the Mizrahim have. On Passover, there's this thing about like beating each other with leeks. It's hysterical. I saw it once in Israel. All sorts of fun traditions that exist out there. If you learn about them, share them. They're beautiful. We should keep them going in our traditions. There are specific foods. This is not the only holiday we do seders for. We do this on, there's such a thing as a Tu B'Shvat seder that is a custom people do. Lots of this sort of adding symbolism in through food, because Jews and Italians, we like to eat, that's for sure. So lots of food symbolism. So I love that. And thank you to Beth, who just put in the chat a link to My Jewish Learning, has an article on the Sephardic Rosh Hashanah Seder. So go My Jewish Learning here. There was one last question, if we've got time, Julie, can I field one more here? About the full prostration during the Elenu on Yom Kippur. And that's a really, really, really great question. So in general, and here, I'm gonna raise up my desk so I can actually demonstrate this just a little bit here. During a normal service, whenever we bow, whether it's for the Amidah, for the Elenu, for anything, in Judaism, we have a very straightforward bow. We bend at the knees, and then we lean over, just about that far, and then we come back up. And in fact, one other part of this bow that happens all of the time is that we're never down when we say God's name. So it would be Baruch Atah, and then we're back up for Adonai. And the reason for that is that in Judaism, we do not have a faith based on fear of God. We do not think about God as the God who's going to smite us from the sky if we do something a little bit wrong. Instead, we think about the loving covenantal relationship we have with God. So when we're bowing to God, we're bowing out of respect, the same way that in Japanese culture, they bow to say hello. In America, we shake one another's hands and we look at each other in the eye as a sign of respect. Similarly, when we bow in Judaism, we are up to face God when we bow, to say, God, I'm talking to you, I'm giving you the respect you deserve, but I'm acknowledging this loving relationship that we have. The one exception to that is on Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur, we are afraid. The theology of Yom Kippur is such that God is literally deciding our fate for the coming year. And we're pleading and we're begging. And so one time a year, sometimes two if your community does it on Rosh Hashanah as well, but really one time a year, when we get to the Elenu prayer, where we acknowledge God's incredible awesomeness, we prostrate. We actually go all the way to the ground. And the words that we're saying during the Elenu when we're bowing is Anachnu Kor'im, which means we bend our knees, Umishtachavim, and we bow, Umodim, and we offer thanks. So we're literally saying the words, we bend our knees and bow to you, while we're physically bending our knees and bowing. And during the normal year, that bow is one of respect and admiration. But on Yom Kippur, we go all the way down because we are a little bit afraid, right? We still believe, immediately after, right? We all throughout the day, we sing Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, God of compassion and mercy, right? We're not really afraid, but like, there's that little moment of like, maybe. Right, so that's the bowing, the full prostration on Yom Kippur. All right, there's also some extra stuff with bowing during the Avodah service. If your community does the Avodah and the priests have their whole thing, and that's a whole other bit. Yes, we do wear a talit during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur during the daytime. We wear a talit at Yom Kippur at night. We don't wear it at Rosh Hashanah at night. That was an easy one. All right, I think we're just about out of time.
Right, well, thank you so much, Rabbi Feivel, for this really wonderful, wonderful series. Thank you everyone for joining us. The final recording, that is the recording of today's class, will be up by the end of day tomorrow on that same page with all of the source sheets. And we also will send you a follow-up email, so please look for that. And yes, let's put Rabbi Feivel, let's put your contact information, your website in the chat box. It's freelancejudaism.com, right?
Absolutely. So we got Feivel at freelancejudaism.com is my email. My website is freelancejudaism.com. Absolutely feel free to reach out. Thank you so much to everyone who joined, whether it was just for today or for the whole series. This has been my absolute pleasure. I truly enjoyed this. And if I said anything that needs clarifying, by all means, reach out. If I said anything that sparks your interest, by all means, reach out. And my true blessing for everyone here today is that you enter in this holiday series, this holiday season, just a little bit more comfortable with this book than before this series. That is my hope. You might not be the greatest Hebrew reader on the planet. You might not know all of the melodies your community does. You might not be able to stay awake for an entire day of prayers. All of that is fine. If you want to bring your own book to supplement some readings in here that keeps you interested and on topic and on point, I want to encourage you to do it. But hopefully, when your rabbi or your service leader calls out a page number and you open it up and you look at that page number, it all of a sudden seems just a little bit more familiar, and you can tell a little bit more where we are in the scope of the day. So thank you all so much. Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova. I'll say all of the everythings, all of the greetings. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week, a wonderful upcoming Shabbat, and a wonderful holiday season. And I hope I get to learn with you all again in the future.